along the diagonals. Black moved pawn to e5. Bravo! You immediately staked your claim on these center squares and prepared to develop the queen and the bishop. White moved pawn to d4. This opening is called the center game. An interesting choice, but not the best, I think. Black moved e, captures on d4. Bravo! This was the only good way to meet the threat of d, captures on e5. White moved queen, captures on d4. I wasn't impressed with how the power chess king opened this game. Moving the queen to the center so early exposes it to harassment from black's minor pieces. The term minor pieces means the knights and bishops. Black then played knight to c6. Very good! You developed the knight and attacked your opponent's queen. You gained time because the queen will have to move again to avoid being captured. Time is one of the most important fundamentals of chess. White moved knight to f3. Yikes! This was a bad move. The power chess king overlooked something here. Black moved knight, captures on d4. Very good! Your opponent made a mistake, and you took advantage of it. The next move was knight, captures on d4. Well, your opponent chose the move that I would have played too. Black continued with bishop to c5. The next move was knight to f5. Next, queen to f6. White continued with knight to c3. Black moved pawn to g6. The next move was knight to d5. Next came queen to e5. White moved knight to g3. Black then played knight to f6. White continued with pawn to f4. Black continued with queen to e6. I'm sorry to say that the move you chose here was not a good one. The way I saw it, queen to d6 would have been a better move in this position. This line appealed more to me. Pawn to c4, and then bishop to b4. Check. And now, knight captures on b4. Next, queen captures on b4. Check. And king to d1. Then the reply, pawn to h5. Then in reply, pawn to e5. Next, pawn to h4, followed by knight to f5. According to my evaluation of the position here, you would have been, notably, better off than after the move that you actually made. White replied, knight captures on c7. Check. Black moved king to e7. White continued with knight captures on e6. That was clearly the only reasonable move. Black continued with d captures on e6. A fine choice. White replied, bishop to b5. Oh, he slipped up there. A more sensible move would have been bishop to d2. The next move was pawn to a6. Not a bad move at all, although I preferred rook to d8. I can't say that one move is better than the other. It's really just a matter of taste. White continued with bishop to a4. Oh, shameful. He should abdicate for that misjudgment. He should have played bishop to d3. Black moved pawn to b5. First rate. White then played bishop to b3. Black moved bishop to b7. I thought that was the best move possible. White replied pawn to e5. There followed knight to e4. White replied knight captures on e4. Next, bishop captures on e4. Necessary? White replies king to f1. Black moved rook a to d8. The next move was pawn to h3. Toss him from the turret for that one. A more sensible move would have been pawn to c3. Here I expected bishop to d3. Check. Then in reply, king to e1. After that, bishop to e4. And then pawn to f5. Then the reply, pawn to h6. And then pawn to f6. Check. After that, king to e8. And now, king to f1. After that, bishop to d3. Check. And now, king to e1. Based on my evaluation of this position, you would be worse off than after the move that your opponent actually made. Black continued with rook to d1. Check. This move demonstrated good insight on your part. White continues with king to e2. Well, your opponent chose the move that I would have played too. The next move was rook captures on h1. Excellent. I thought you had an overwhelming advantage. That's impressive. White continued with pawn to g4. Next, rook to d8. White replied pawn to c4. Black continued with rook to h2. Check. White then played king to e1. The only good move. Black moved bishop to b4. Check. Next came king to f1. Clearly, no other move could have been considered here. Next came rook to h1. Check. Next came king to f2. Well, he made the best move. Sorry about that. However, I really thought that you were crushing your opponent at this point. Black continued with bishop to c5. Check. White moved king to g3. Next, rook to d3. Check. That works. White replied king to h4. The next move was rook d captures on h3. Check. White continued with king to g5. Black continued with pawn to h6. Checkmate. Splendid!